as well as hotels in cities across the country. At least 290 people were murdered, hundreds more were wounded. Sri Lankan authorities say the attackers were affiliated with a local terror group. The attackers were radical Muslims. Their motives were religious. Their targets were Christians. None of that is speculation. It's true. And maybe because it is so true and so obviously true, nobody in authority wanted to say it out loud. So instead, they went to great lengths to avoid clear language. Quote, the attacks on tourists and Easter worshippers in Sri Lanka are an attack on humanity, tweeted Barack Obama. Hillary Clinton used the same awkward phrase. I'm praying for everyone affected by today's horrific attack on Easter worshippers and travelers in Sri Lanka, she wrote. Easter worshippers. Why not just say Christians? Nobody worships Easter. There's a reason, of course. Euphemisms are never accidental. Our leaders believe Christians are the problem. They're the dangerous ones. They can't be trusted. Tell them the truth and they might go crazy and organize a new crusade, unsheath their swords and march on Jerusalem. You never know with Christians. Just tonight, the Washington Post ran a story with this headline, quote, Sri Lanka church bombings stoke far-right anger in West. As if you'd have to be some kind of Nazi to be upset about church bombings. That's what they seem to think. That's why our leaders consistently ignore the persecution of Christians around the world. When U.S. policy contributes to that persecution, and it does, they say nothing about it. For example, less than 20 years after we overthrew Saddam Hussein, 3/4 of Iraq's once thriving Christian population is gone. They've either been murdered by Islamic extremists, ISIS in some cases, or they've been driven out of the country as refugees. In Syria, Christians lived for generations under the protection of the Assad family. You're not allowed to say that anymore or even know it, but it doesn't make it any less true. It is true. And you can talk to the hundreds of thousands of Christians who fled the country since the U.S. began supporting the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad if you want to know details. But no one in the American media ever asks their opinion. Nobody cares. Nor do we care that so many of our allies in the Middle East, countries that receive billions in U.S. tax dollars every year, repress Christianity. Afghanistan, for example, receives billions from us every year. Why? So we can turn it into Belgium. But right now in Afghanistan, converting to Christianity carries a death sentence if you're a Muslim. The same is true in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, both countries backed by the United States. In Egypt, conversion is legally restricted, and while it doesn't carry a death sentence, polls show that most of the public in Egypt wishes it did. So where's our State Department in all this? The State Department, which spends a lot of time looking out for the human rights of people in countries you can't pronounce. They ignore it. When was the last time the United States pushed another country to treat Christians better? Well, in some cases, it would be pretty easy to do that. We could just demand that Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or Afghanistan, countries that are dependent on us, implement full freedom of religion before we give them any more U.S. aid. Why wouldn't we do that? Because we're being afraid of being criticized by the nihilists at the Washington Post? Maajid Nawaz is the founder of Quilliam and the author of Radical, My Journey Out of Islamist Extremism, and he joins us tonight. We're always happy to have him. So explain, if you would, the thinking behind not just being straightforward with the public about an event like the one we saw yesterday in Sri Lanka.
Well, Tucker, let me begin by saying I am a Muslim, and I express my deepest condolences to Christians around the world.
Flash you fear, actually, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Maajid Nawaz, thank you. Wise voice, as always, in a moment like this. Thanks very much. Nina Shea is a religious freedom expert at the Hudson Institute here in Washington, and she joins us tonight. And in fact, Nina, I would say that undersells what you do. You are the most consistent and I think the most knowledgeable expert on the persecution of Christians around the world.
Well, thank you, Tucker, and thanks for focusing on this important issue.
So give us an overview of the picture.
Well, let me just say that first, that this was a message not just to those Christians who were attacked and killed over the weekend, over Easter weekend, but it was a message that there's basically a war on Christianity from a certain segment of the Muslim population, a Muslim extremist population. And we're seeing that intensify over the last decade in places like Egypt, where Sam Tadros, who works at the Hudson Institute and is an analyst there, who is a Copt himself, estimates there are about 500 church attacks in the last couple years. These occurred on Palm Sunday, a coordinated attack a couple years ago on Christians in in December around Christmas time at the seat of the Coptic Pope, St. Mark's Cathedral in Cairo. I was just there and saw that site. It's heartbreaking, and it happens quite often in the villages, including last week. In Egypt.
Where is the United States State Department? Where are American churches?
It's not saying enough. And the president of Egypt tends to go after those bombing attacks that ISIS does, but that there are extremist Muslims in the local neighborhoods that are attacking churches with impunity, and have been for quite a while in Egypt. There are about 10% of the population are Christians there. Nigeria estimated 900 church attacks in one recent 5-year period. So these are, again, happening on Christmas, on Easter. It doesn't matter which stripe of Christianity you are,
right.
It's across the board.
So, I mean, there are powerful churches in the United States, rich churches for sure, powerful clergymen. I don't hear this issue addressed by them ever. Why is that?
Well, I don't think people are aware of it. They're afraid of talking about it. Some of them are afraid that they will get retribution by the extremists if they talk about it back in those countries. So there are varied reasons why people don't talk about it, but the short-term solution is security.
Yes.
And we need to promote that. And in fact, the United States did give a quiet warning to Sri Lanka that churches were going to be attacked over Easter, and they did not heed it. So we need to elevate this.
So we've sent...
But we don't understand there's a link between the two.
Yes.
And the weakness of those Christians feeds this that makes them a very soft target. And the governments don't feel like any pressure coming from us. They feel pressure coming from one side. That's the extremists.
No, that's such a smart point. There is a link. There is absolutely a link. Nina Shea, thank you.
Thank you,
very
Tucker.
much.